I'm Keith Bundy, and I come from a company called Site Improve here in the cities. We're a company that monitors websites for quality assurance, SEO, analytics, and accessibility. And I'm an accessibility consultant and trainer. And so this morning, I'm here to talk about accessibility. What's it all about? And this is a very basic introduction to accessibility, and we'll call it Accessibility 101. What I find in my various travels and my various jobs that I do is that most people have heard of accessibility. They know what it is in a sense, but they have never really seen it used by a real user, and B, really would just like a brush up. They're not really sure of why it's so important and exactly what accessibility deals with. So that's what we're going to cover in the next hour. We're going to hopefully have time for Q&A afterwards. I will warn you guys, even though you're a good-looking group this morning, don't raise your hands because I won't see them. Just speak up if you have a question, or if something goes wonky with the slideshow, just speak up and we'll go from there. So here's what we're going to cover in today's presentation. We're going to learn what is meant by the term accessibility. We're going to then develop a basic understanding of disabilities and assistive technologies. And then we'll learn a little bit about the guidelines and 10 things that you can do right now to assist in digital accessibility, making sure your sites and your work are more accessible. So we got to start with a definition, and I found a good definition from the Web Access Initiative, and it simply says web accessibility is actively designing, developing, and creating content in such a way that it does not hinder any person from interacting with the website. And I like that definition. Let's read it one more time. Website accessibility is actively designing, developing, and creating content in such a way that it does not hinder any person from interacting with the website. And I like that definition a lot because it points out something that's very important. Though a lot of the time when we think of accessibility, hang on just a second, I want to move something. When we think of accessibility, we think of people with disabilities, and accessibility is designed for people with disabilities. It goes farther than that. Accessibility is for everyone, making sure that everyone can have a smooth experience with their website. So accessibility benefits everybody, cleaner code, better SEO, all the way around. Accessibility is a good thing. But a lot of times accessibility does start with people with disabilities. Now, an important lesson when you're working on a website is to start with accessibility in mind. You see a picture here of Robson Square out in Vancouver, British Columbia. And what they did was they designed this square with accessibility in mind so that the ramps and the steps work together very smoothly, and the square is actually accessible to absolutely anyone. Quite a feat that they accomplished there. Then you can see what happens sometimes when you try to add accessibility later. This just isn't going to work, is it? You know, the ramp goes maybe halfway up the steps and it's just a mess. And a lot of times that's true with websites, guys. If we start with accessibility in mind, it's a little more work. Let me tell you, accessibility is a little more work. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not too bad. And you can create an experience that works for everybody. Whereas if you try to build in accessibility later, it's often easy to end up with a mess like you see on the screen there, where things just aren't working right and aren't interfacing together as they should. I want to talk to you briefly about 5 myths regarding accessibility. Myth number 1, accessibility doesn't affect many people. Well, that's not true. There's an estimate out there that 1 out of every 5 people, that's 20% of our population, has some kind of disability. It may be an obvious disability like mine. I mean, if you're around me very long at all, you'll know that I'm as blind as can be. I can't see a thing. It may not be an obvious disability. It may be something of cognitive nature. It may be something with physical limitation of some type that it's not obvious to you, but 1 out of every 5 persons is reported to have a disability. Many of them benefit from accessible technology on the web, but let me tell you another group that benefits from accessibility that you're probably not even thinking about this morning. Now, think about baby boomers. Baby boomers are moving toward retirement right now. So think about a lady that's getting close to retirement and she doesn't have a diagnosed disability, but the vision's not what it used to be. And so she really has trouble seeing some of the websites. Could she benefit from accessibility? You bet she could. Think about Grandpa, maybe 85, 80 years old, wants the email to send, or the internet to send emails and stuff with his grandkids and look at a few things. He's got a slight tremor in his hand. He's not diagnosed with a disability. He's just aging, and for the most part, aging gracefully. We'll get that right in a minute. But his hand just has that little tremor, and he can't control the mouse like he used to control it. So he could benefit from being able to operate a site using the keyboard only. So a lot of people do benefit whether they have a diagnosed disability or not. Myth number 2, only experts can implement fixes. The truth is that many fixes can be implemented by content creators. Some need developers to input, but many fixes can be implemented by content creators. Number 3, you don't have to worry about it until you get a request. Well, that's not a wise idea. Let me ask you something. Is it better to put resources on the front end to make a site accessible, or to wait until you get a request and have to do what we did with that screen we saw earlier with the square that wasn't quite built with accessibility in mind? It's always better to start with accessibility in mind, or to start remedying the problem as soon as you know it exists. Number 4, accessible design interferes with general design and layout. Well, 20 years ago, there might have been some truth to that. I still remember the fights blind people and sighted people were having about images. The sighted people were saying, well, we want these cool images on our pages. And there were blind people out there saying, you take those images and put them where the sun doesn't shine, because we can't use images whatsoever. Well, now, thanks to a lot of good work that's been done, images are fine. And you can't tell an accessible site from an inaccessible site just by looking at it. There's really not a difference. And so everything's good. And the 5th myth, you're not required to fix because it's cost prohibitive. While there is a provision like that, it's very rare. Usually, cost prohibitive is not a factor. You can afford to make the fixes. It may be a little inconvenient, but you can do it. And if you happen to be contacted by someone legally, you'll be required to do it. So that's another myth that we need to deal with. So let me ask you a question. Do you use any accessibility features? I'll bet you do. Technology makes things easier for all persons, but it makes things possible for people, some people, particularly people who have disabilities. You probably have used some things that were designed for accessibility. For example, how about Siri or some dictation form on your phone? Do you ever use that? Those were designed with accessibility in mind first and foremost, but they're usable by everybody. How about magnification on the screen? Do you ever use that?
Yeah,
sure.
Presenting all the time.
Yeah, sure. And that was designed as an accessibility feature, but you can use that at this point, to help yourself. How about voice to text or text to speech? Has anybody ever used that? I have. My youngest son had a girlfriend who was studying pre-med at the time, and she found out VoiceOver was on the iPhone because of me. And she started using VoiceOver to read her notes while she was driving. She could still see the road and listen to the notes. So again, predictive text is useful. Font adjustments, all kinds of things. Vibrating alerts, visible alerts. How about if you're in a crowd? I bet you use captions to read text on videos. If a video, you want to see it and the crowd's too loud. Everybody uses those kind of things. So it's very easy to see that we all use accessibility things. And that goes even beyond the technology realm. Let me ask you this question. How many of you have ever ridden a bicycle and ridden down or up a curb cut? No. Or maybe you've seen someone push a baby stroller up and down a curb cut. Designed for people with disabilities, but usable to everybody. Here's another one. How many of you have used the automatic doors at a Walmart or a grocery store? I bet you all have. Those were originally designed for people that couldn't use their hands to do things. And so, again, another interesting piece of technology. We've got one in this building, the elevator. Some people prefer to use an elevator to climb to the 4th floor, or when you're old like me, to the 2nd floor. And I'm one of those baby boomers that may not have physical disabilities other than blindness diagnosed, but they're there, believe me. And so it's important to think about how we all use accessibility in various ways. So there's a lot of things out there that we need to be aware of and be cognizant of regarding accessibility. So we all use technology in various ways, various types of disability technology, and it's very important to remember that it's not just for people with disabilities, it's for everyone. Let's talk about the different types of disabilities, people who are affected by accessibility techniques. Of course, there are people, I'm a little partial to the people with visual impairments because I have one, and there are people who are totally blind. There are people with significant visual impairment. There are people who are colorblind. Did you know 1 out of every 12 men is colorblind? And so ladies, when your husband can't tell you if an outfit looks good or not, he may be colorblind or he may just be lying to you, but you got to at least consider that as an option. And so there are all kinds of visual disabilities. Not everybody who has a visual disability is totally blind. There are people who just need magnification on the screen, people who just need to adjust the colors on the screen. Other disabilities out there, there are people with learning disabilities. We're going to talk about screen readers in a minute, and I'm going to point out that screen readers are also used by people who have certain types of dyslexia. So there are people who have learning disabilities, people who have ADHD, people who have hearing impairments. There are people who have motor impairments that can't use their hands like they'd like to. All of these people benefit from accessibility. They're the various types of disabilities that we think about when we think about in terms of accessibility. I want to talk a little bit more about blindness and low vision. Visual impairment is often defined as best corrected visual acuity of worse than either 20/40 or 20/60. So there are all kinds of levels of visual impairment. As in August of 2014, and this is the most recent statistic I can find, there were 285 million people estimated to be visually impaired in the world. 246 of those people had low vision. 39 million of those people had blindness. So that's why we emphasize a lot screen readers and visual aspects of accessibility, because it's a very high majority of people. Blind people and people with severe visual impairments use screen readers. A screen reader is a program that reads the text on the screen to a person who's blind or significantly visually impaired or who has a significant reading disability. Screen readers output information in voice and in Braille. I'm using a screen reader called JAWS for Windows. JAWS stands for Job Access with Speech. I know at least one of you has used JAWS to do some testing. JAWS is the most widely used screen reader on the market in the Windows environment, and it would come out in speech if I let it on my computer, and you will hear it when we finish up. We're going to do a demo of a couple of websites. But right now I'm reading it with a Braille display. The little piece of equipment standing right in front of me on the podium here is a Braille display, and so I'm reading the content of the slides on the Braille display. There are some other Windows screen readers. The most notable are NVDA, which stands for Non-Visual Desktop Access. I believe that's going to become the most popular screen reader within a couple of years for one major reason. It's free. JAWS will cost you about $1,000 to get set up, maybe a little more. NVDA is totally free and open source. So I believe we're going to see JAWS and NVDA flip positions in the near future. Microsoft is also working on a program called Narrator. They've had it since Windows 7. Basically, I said all along it's more of an emergency screen reader to get you out of trouble when none of the other screen readers will work when Windows is about to die. And they're now trying to make it a full-fledged screen reader. So I think it's going to be one of those that'll get some of the share of the market here in the near future, and there are others. All Macs come with VoiceOver. Same with iOS devices. If you have an iPhone, you have a screen reader. It's called VoiceOver. It's in your settings under General Accessibility. It's a little different. If you turn it on, it's going to frustrate you because when you touch something, instead of activating it, it just reads you what you're on, and you have to double tap to get it to work. I had a hip replacement back in 2011, and I'd just gotten my first iPhone. Never thought to tell my wife how it worked. And so I was getting all these phone calls. I was under anesthetic, and we had a couple of complications, so I was out of it for about a week. My wife kept getting phone calls, and she'd just touch to try to answer, and it wouldn't answer. It'd just keep ringing and telling her who was calling, and she was about ready to throw that phone away. Said a few nice things to me when I came out of the anesthetic, too. So those are all things that are out there for people who are visually impaired. Another disability I really want to address this morning is people with manual disabilities who can't use a mouse. They may need a smaller or larger keyboard, may need a one-handed keyboard. Some people need an eye tracking device or a mouse, a blow stick, or a head wand that they can use to point to the screen. All kinds of issues. That's why it's important to make all sites operable, both with the mouse and the keyboard. Something we've got to remember to do, because there are many people who can't, for various reasons, use the mouse, whether that's visual or manual or whatever the problem might be. And by the way, keyboard shortcuts out there are really good. It requires a little bit of memorization, but I would almost challenge any of you to a duel with the computer. I don't know if some of you were in here and saw me finding the audio settings to make it work. And when I've got the speech going, I read at about 400 words a minute with speech. And when I've got that going, I could compete with anybody if I know what to do. Now, another factor I just want to address real briefly is what I want to call a temporary disability. A lot of people end up with temporary disabilities. What would be an example? Well, let's say hopefully this doesn't happen, but you're going out today, it's been raining, you slip and fall, you're right-handed, you break your right wrist. Hopefully it doesn't happen to anybody. If it does, don't call me, I didn't mean it. You won't be able to use the mouse very well for 6 weeks or so, will you? You'll have a temporary disability. Sometimes if you go out and the sun's real bright and it blinds you, you're temporarily blind. It's not for very long, but you are. And that's why we always have sun visors to drive when the sun's coming in the direction of the windshield. Sometimes it can be an environmental disability. I briefly mentioned earlier, if you're in a large crowd and everybody's talking and making noise and somebody sends you a video clip you want to see and hear, and you might be able to see it, but you sure can't hear it, and that's where you use the captions. So there can even as simple as this. What if you're coming out of Walmart and you got your arms full of groceries? Is that a temporary disability? You better believe it is, because you couldn't open a door if you had to. At least if you shopped like my wife, you couldn't. All right, let's talk for a minute about the guidelines behind web accessibility. They're called WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And this slide just became slightly out of date this week, but for practical purposes, we're going to leave it in here. We're now up to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, WCAG 2.1. The guidelines essentially have the same purpose. They're a globally recognized voluntary consensus standard developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, Web Accessibility Initiative, to provide recommendations for making web content more accessible. If you follow these guidelines, your sites will be accessible to a wider range of people. And that's the same goal with 2.1. Also, it'll also make your web content more usable to users in general if you follow these guidelines. Now, when we talk about 2.0 today, basically we're still talking about 2.1 because they didn't take anything away from 2.0, but they added a few things for people with visual impairments and cognitive impairments into 2.1. So what we're saying here that'll say 2.0 is still relevant today. 2.0 is a normative document, meaning, like I said, that you have to meet the requirements laid out in the document for the criteria, and in order to claim conformance. So these success criteria are divided into the following 4 principles, and we'll discuss those. We'll just go over them briefly: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So let's talk about perceivable. One set of guidelines is designed to answer these questions. Can everybody perceive what's on the screen? Can everybody perceive it? Maybe not with their eyes, maybe not with their ears, but can everybody perceive what's on your page? This is where we talk about providing text alternative for any non-text content, because screen readers can't read images at all. But if you put alt text on the image describing the purpose of the image, I can read it in Braille or with the screen reader if there's alt text. That's why there's such a big deal about making alt text. Simpler language is important. Providing alternatives for time-based media, captions, video descriptions. We'll talk about those a little later. All of that's important. You want to create content that can be presented in different ways and still give the information and the structure of the page. You want to make it easier for users to see and hear content, including separating the foreground from the background. The second principle for WCAG is operable, and this is pretty self-explanatory, but you want to make everything functional from a keyboard as well as a mouse. You want to give people time to read and use the content. Don't require, unless it's very, very essential, don't give such long time limits, or at least allow time limits to be extended on things. Don't design content in a way that's known to cause seizures. There are people who have photoepileptic seizures if they engage in too much flash. When Breaking Dawn came out, there were a lot of people taken to the hospital, for example, for seizures because there was so much flash. They didn't even know they had seizure possibilities, and they were having seizures all over the place. So important to design your pages so that there's no more than 3 flashes per second on the page. So you want everybody to be able to navigate and find content. Make your content understandable. Make text content readable. You know, the average American, what grade level do you think the average American reads at? Any ideas?
5th grade.
That's close.
4.
No, it's a little higher.
6.
They're actually saying now between 6th and 8th. So you want to kind of be aware of that. Unless you're designing for a specific group that you know reads at a higher level, you really want to keep that reading level down to that 6th to 8th grade level, maybe as low as 5th sometimes. You want your web pages to appear and operate in predictable ways. You want users to be able to correct errors. You want users to be able to understand what's going on. And the last principle of WCAG is robust. That means maximizing compatibility with current and future user agents, including assistive technologies and web browsers. Make your piece of your program, your web page, operable with as many browsers as possible. Try to anticipate for the future. Make them compatible for the phone, the computer. There's a whole lot we could say about this. The mobile environment's going to continue to grow. Robust means making things available to the biggest majority of people who are using technology on your site. There are 3 levels to WCAG: A, AA, and AAA. Right now, the legal standard in most cases is conformance with A and AA criteria. A-level criteria affect the greatest number of people with disabilities in the most significant ways. For example, not having alt text on an image is an A-level criteria. That's needed. And so A-level criteria really affect a lot of people in a severe way. AA criteria still affect a lot of people, not quite as many, and the effect may not be quite as severe, but still a significant effect. AAA criteria affect some people, but not too many. They're good to shoot for. It's almost impossible to get a site that's compatible with WCAG, A, AA, and AAA guidelines. So what's been the legal standard now is that your site complies with WCAG 2.0 level AA, which means it meets A and AA criteria. That's how the new Section 508 for schools and other entities that receive government funding, that's what the guidelines are based on, WCAG 2.0 level AA. And in most cases where people have been sued for lack of accessibility, the criteria that's been, the judgment has been WCAG 2.0 level AA. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, let's talk about 10 things right now you can do to make your website more accessible. And then after we briefly go over these 10 things, I want to give you a little demo of how I browse with a screen reader. And we'll go over these quickly, but if you have questions, you can stop me. The first thing is check your titles. Each page needs a unique title. The title is the first thing, for example, that a screen reader user will hear. First thing the screen reader reads is the title of the page. You want it to be unique. You want it to be relatively short. Search engines are looking as well. And a good rule of thumb is make your title unique and try to keep it to 60 characters or less. Now, there's no title police that are going to come around and ding you if you go 85 characters, but it's just good to keep it as brief as possible, yet unique. Number 2, add skip to main content links. Someone who only uses the keyboard to navigate web pages may have to press the tab key a whole lot of times in order to get to the main content on your page if you don't have a skip link. I have found this to be true. I've tried tabbing to the main content of some pages and had to press a tab 50 to 60 times. Whereas if you can just see it, you can just go whoop right down to it. So the skip to main content link is pretty cool. You put it at the top of the page. You make it focusable only if the person presses the tab key. So that if somebody who can't use a mouse hits your page, they press the tab key, there's the skip to content link, they press enter, and they're already at your main content. It can save 20, 30, 40, 50 presses of the tab key, and it's so important. It's also important to screen reader users as well. Not as important because we have other ways of bypassing a lot of the navigation menus to get to the main content, but it is important for keyboard users. I tell you how to make the skip to main content link here. You want to set a bookmark or an ID where the main content begins and then link to that ID. And it's really important. It should be the first thing seen by a keyboard user. The third thing you can do is use proper heading structure. This is big for me. Use headings to organize your page. How many of you guys, let's go back in our minds. Some of you, this may be a traumatic experience. Some of you, it'll bring about pleasant memories. Go back to 7th, 8th grade. Remember Mrs. Jones standing at the front of the class and requiring you to do outlines, to read a chapter and outline it, to, if you're going to make a speech, write an outline of that speech, to get your topics organized. That's basically what the proper use of heading structure is, outlining your material in content. It helps a lot of people when you use headings to organize your page. It helps people with cognitive disabilities get a better idea of what's on a page. It helps screen reader users tremendously. When you load a web page, as soon as I bring up a page, you can see what's on that page, and you immediately have a good idea of the structure and the organization of that page just by glancing at it. People who use a screen reader can't do that. And so for us, the quickest way to skim a page is to go through the headings. If they're done proper with proper semantic markup, go browse by heading, see what's on the page pretty quickly, find which heading I'm interested in, read material under that heading. So it's important. Now, when you do your heading structures, it's always recommended that you do heading level 1 for restating the title of the page. Heading level 2, your first main point. Heading level 3, the sub-point under number 2, and so on. So it's using it in outline form. A couple of things I want to tell you, though, is don't use headings strictly for visual effect. Use them to organize the page. If you want visual effect, feel free to go ahead and use CSS to style your headings however you want to, but use headings to organize the page and use the actual HTML tags, H1 through H6. Screen readers will not pick up different fonts and stuff as headings unless you use the heading tag. So you can sit and play with the fonts all day and you think, man, I've got all these headings on the page. Screen readers won't pick up on those. They may look like headings, they may act like headings, but they're not headings. You have to use the HTML tags. But what a benefit it is to those of us using screen readers to be able to do that. The fourth thing is make your links clearly identifiable. Link text needs to clearly say where the link is going. The reason being, people who are blind or who use a screen reader can bring up a list of links, which is really handy, especially on some of those news sites that have 281 links on them, and they do exist. To bring up that list is really handy, and then you can arrow to what you want, or even use first letter navigation and type a letter and get, if I know I'm looking for Cubs beat Pirates in the baseball scores, if I type C, I should get to Cubs beat Pirates pretty quickly. Now, this is why it's important to have clear link text. Things like click here, learn more. When someone who's using a screen reader has a list of links brought up, they don't see the context with the link. Now, there is a way that you can go out and see the context, but beginning screen reader users might not know how to do that yet, and also it takes away from efficiency. We all use the web because we want to be efficient, right? Well, we want to have fun too, but we want to be efficient. And if I have to go out of my links list to see what a link's all about just because it says click here or learn more, it's detracting from the purpose of efficiency. So we like good, solid link text. Now, if additional text messes up your styles for the page, you can always use ARIA labels with links text. ARIA is a technique, if you're not familiar with it, that's designed to let screen reader users know when menus are active, additional text that you can't fit into the text on your page, various things along those lines. I don't want to spend a lot of time on ARIA this morning. But you want your text to clearly say where you're going. You want to avoid, like I said, link text like click here, whatever, and be as clear as possible. The other thing you want to make sure of is when you have your links, and this is not on the slides, but you want to make sure that they're identified more than just by color. Because again, you've got some people that are colorblind, some people that have low vision, issues with color, so you always want to make sure that they're underlined or in bold. I think a good rule of thumb is, unless it's part of a links menu itself, make sure your link is underlined as well as in color.
When you have a read more link, that is, like, let's say you have a title and then a summary, and then after the summary you have a read more link.
Yep.
Is that read more link actually a detractor because it is ambiguous?
Yeah,
I mean, the title is linked to the content.
Right.
And as is read more, but would it be better to just omit read more entirely?
I think it would. Either that or put an ARIA label in there that says read more about whatever, because a person who's going to bring up the list of links, you can have read more 40 times on the page and they're not going to know what it's going to do. So yeah, in that case it is more of a detractor. Now, I want to quickly add, you don't want to sacrifice for this. You don't want to sacrifice things that people who don't need accessibility like. So if a lot of sighted people like those read more links, you might be better served to just put an ARIA label on that says read more about, whatever, because then everybody's got what they need. The screen reader users have what they need. People who can see still have their read more links. So it really depends on what your audience wants. The good news today is, I told you about the battles 20 years ago. The good news is today, everybody can have what they want if people put a little thought into it. Next is labeling graphics properly and clearly. Each graphic needs an alt attribute. If it's just decorative, if it's just a cute little thing on there that looks cool but serves no purpose, you can do alt equals quote quote. That's a null attribute, and screen readers will completely ignore that. So you can put that on, and those graphics will be totally ignored. But you do want to put an alt tag on every graphic, explaining the purpose of the graphic, describing it however important you deem the description needs to be. Make them clear and concise. Mostly you want to convey the purpose of the image, but you can also convey what's going on in the image as well. For example, you could say a picture of students walking into a library with books. Then we know we're talking about the library and that it's actually used, things like that. What you might want to do is close your eyes and say, if I couldn't see that picture, what would I need to know about it for the purpose of this page? It's a good question to ask yourself. Alt tags are a wonderful thing. You can have longer descriptions if necessary. Now, I've heard they're deprecating the long desk attribute. I can't verify that at this point, but right now it's still usable. If you're doing a chart or a graph and you don't decide to describe it in the HTML of the page itself, a long desk is really good there because people who use screen readers need to know the things about your chart and graph that people that can see can get from them. Make sure image links state clearly where they're going to go, and make sure that images representing buttons are labeled as buttons for screen reader users. Number 6, make forms usable. This is my big frustration. I hate going on a site shopping and the form isn't usable, and I have to either go out of what we call forms mode. Screen readers actually have what's called a virtual memory or a virtual buffer, and they will arrange a page in a certain order so that if pressing certain keys like H will go to the different headings, B will go to the different buttons, K will go to the different links, all of those things. In JAWS that's place marker, and NVDA it's links. You have to go into forms mode to fill out a form. That means you turn off the virtual buffer so that you can enter text into your page. It's nothing like having to go out of the form, back into the virtual buffer to find out what's going on. So what I say is clearly label each form field. Don't use placeholder text to label fields. That can be tempting, but a lot of people, when placeholder text disappears, they don't know what's supposed to go in the page. They may have forgotten or may not be able to gather it from context. So use real labels. Make sure error messages are clearly identified and read to the person as soon as the error comes up with the screen reader. I hate filling out a form of about 14 fields, and I get done, I click submit, and I get this error message. A required field was left blank. Okay, thank you. I have to go back and check all 14 fields. Now, I was filling out a form earlier this morning, and it was really cool because I didn't think one of the fields was required for me, and so I didn't fill it in, and immediately I get the message, this field is required, please fill it in. And so it took me right to that field. I was able to complete it, and everything went smoothly. So it's important to read those error messages. Make sure that buttons are actual buttons or have an ARIA label of buttons so that screen readers know what it is. And there's a whole lot more we could say about forms, but just going over some basics here this morning. Number 7, keyboard controls for audio and video players. Make sure that all the buttons for your audio and video players can be operated from the keyboard. One of the biggest hindrances, and again, I think it's just lack of knowledge. I don't think it's rudeness on the part of anybody, but it's lack of knowledge. One of the biggest hindrances is to have all the buttons on a video or audio player usable with the mouse and not with the keyboard. People don't think about someone using their site who, for whatever reason, can't use a mouse. So you got to have those buttons operable from the keyboard. And make sure, this one's big, make sure that audio video players don't autoplay when the video comes up. Tell me, what would be wrong with autoplay? In a lot of ways, it's pretty cool, but what could be wrong with autoplay?
Playing at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Interferes with your screen reader.
Yeah. What if you're listening to a screen reader and all of a sudden, in yesterday's sports activities, yesterday's baseball score, and it just totally drowns out the screen reader. That's why I make a little statement that autoplay is the screen reader user's public enemy number 1. Just find out there's a play button, and also you want to make sure that closed captions and audio descriptions can be turned on and off in videos too. Which leads us to number 8, captions, transcripts, and descriptions. All videos that have audio content need captions and transcripts for people who have hearing impairments. They can't hear the audio, but they can read the captions. They can read a transcript that identifies the speakers. And so it's very useful to have captions and transcripts of all videos. Now, YouTube is doing a pretty good job with auto captioning. It's a lot better than it was, but my caution is when you're tempted to use YouTube, go for it, but always go back and proofread. Because even on a good day, YouTube's still at about 90 to 92%. And so often things are not quite as correct as they should be. So always go back to that. Videos need audio descriptions because people with visual impairments, unless it's very clearly explained by the person doing the video, they can't tell what's going on. I could be making a fist at somebody at Nate over there, and if somebody's just watching this video and I didn't say that, they're not going to know what's going on. You have to have audio description in so that people with visual impairments can get equal from the content on the page. They can be equally involved. So if we were doing an audio description, it would say, Keith looks at the guy in the front row and makes a fist. I'm not really going to make a fist at Nate, but that's what we would do to just give a description of what's going on. You think about if I couldn't see, what am I missing on this video? If you can't do an audio description, a transcript with descriptions of video activities will do. That meets an A-level criteria. AA requires a transcript and audio description, but at the A level, the transcript would suffice. Number 9, avoid keyboard traps. What's a keyboard trap? Well, Keyboard users have to be able to tab to, into, through, and out of elements on the page. They've got to be able to get into and out of elements, go through them, and when they can't do that, it's called a keyboard trap. If they have a form and they can start filling it out, but they can't get out of it with the keyboard, they're trapped in there. It's called a keyboard trap. The keyboard-only user has to be able to accomplish everything the mouse user can accomplish on your page. So you want to make sure all elements of your page are in the tab order and that they work properly using the keyboard. You can easily test this. Put your mouse away. Now I know for some people that causes tremendous psychological anxiety. Others don't mind too much, but it's a really good thing to do for yourself. Put your mouse away, look at the keyboard only, and see if you can still operate the page as you want to. Number 10, structure tables properly. Don't use tables for layout purposes because screen readers may recognize them, and then somebody using a screen reader may try to use table reading commands and won't get anything out of it. But tables are awesome for displaying data and the relationships of data. And so what we want to do is don't use layout tables, but use tables to convey data and make sure that your table data cells are associated in the HTML with their appropriate table header cells. That's what it's all about, guys, associating the data cells with their header cells. If you do that, you'll find that tables are very usable for people with screen readers. They're also better for people with cognitive disabilities as well. The greater the complexity, the greater the challenge, but you can use complex tables. But I believe in the KISS philosophy, keep it simple and succinct. So again, that's about tables. Now, I'm going to show you how I browse with a web page, but I'll give you a couple of seconds here for questions if you have questions at this point. Any questions? All right, we're going to turn on speech. And I think you can hear this. Can everybody hear that?
Yeah.
Let's go to a website here. We'll go to USA Today. All right, now, when someone uses a screen reader, there are 4 basic ways that they use to browse a web page. And each person is unique. And I have a slide in my other presentation of Ray Charles and another one of Stevie Wonder pointing out how we're all unique, because if you ask me to play the piano like Ray Charles, you're going to have a problem on your hands. And if I do my imitation of Stevie Wonder, I'll be kicked out of the building. You don't want to see that. Everybody's unique, but there are some things we have in common. We can browse by headings, which I'm going to show you in a minute. We can browse by words, or by reading line by line. We can browse by lists of links, and we can even browse by pressing tab to go to the various elements on the page. I'm going to use a say all command here to start this page, and it's going to read line by line, and I want you to tell me what you think it's saying. Anybody got ideas? No, it was actually a third-party content ad frame. Now, the reason I do this is not to embarrass anybody or laugh at you, but I want you to know that some people with screen readers read at that pace. That's my pace of reading. It's nearly 400 words a minute, and the reason being, I've used a screen reader for like 30 years. Now, everybody in this room, unless you have a diagnosed reading disability, I would bet solid money that you read faster than you read when you were in 2nd grade. And I would win. That's the way it is with screen reader use. You start out at a much slower pace, like I'm going to show you here in a minute, and you get faster and faster. And like I said, that's my actual speed, not adjusted for this program. Let's go to a different profile. Oh, be quiet. All right, let's see if you can understand this one a little better.
USA Today, late visited link graphic USA Today, third party and content frame, link graphic symbol / third party and content frame and navigation region.
That's easier, isn't it?
But it's still nonsense.
Yeah, it's still nonsense, and it's because of that third-party ad frame. Let me show you something about that. I want to show you what happens when you don't label a graphic.
Visited third party and content frame.
Now, I don't know what this is. Can you see the screen, the web page?
No, it's actually even more effective that we're on the slides for
You're still on the
questions.
slide. I'm not sure how to make you where you can see the page. Let me try something here.
Search box. Tor. Resource monitor. Desktop app. Find results. Resource enter. Resource monitor. RPM window.
No,
CPU.
that's not where I want to be.
C Alt F4. USA Today. Latest world and US news. USAT. A. Duplicate file remover. 10. Duplicate. Find results in
No,
escape.
guys, you may have to deal with just hearing it, which is all right because I can't figure out how to get the monitor to work. But let me show you what happens on this third-party ad here.
Link graphic symbol /80769508018018273837372.
All right. This is what happens when you don't put alt tags on your graphic. It said link graphic, and then it says SIMGAD /8076950801826383720. Now, every time there's an image without an alt tag, that's the kind of stuff we get. It either reads the file name or the path to the file, and it's crazy. Now, we can read line by line and go through the navigation. There's the third-party frame ending.
Navigation region.
Navigation region.
List of 15 items. Visited link graphic USA Today.
That's the logo for USA Today. They labeled that nicely.
Link news.
Link news.
Visited link sports.
Visited link sports. We're going to go to sports because I don't want to get into anything political.
Enter.
And that's all the news seems to be these days.
Navigation region.
So now I've browsed line by line. I'm going to show you, we're going to browse by headings for a little bit and see what's on this page here.
Videos. Info.
Takes a minute for the page to load.
Sports. Latest news. LeBron addresses free agency future after sweep heading level 1 link.
Okay, did you understand that one? Yeah, LeBron addresses free agency future after sweep. So we can keep browsing by headings if I don't want to read that.
LeBron addresses free agency future after sweep heading level 1 link.
I don't know why that heading read twice.
Top stories heading level 2. Headlines heading level 5. Galleries heading level 6. Featured content heading level 6.
So if I want to go back to top stories,
Head top LeBron address top stories.
there's
heading
top
level
stories,
2.
and I can read by
Link Belmont Stakes. Host time. Lineup. How to watch. Link Caleb beats USA's Stevens in French Open final. Link Kerr. MJ and LeBron 2 best players I've seen.
and you'll notice it's saying link on all these. That's because it's a link to the stories. So let's assume I want to read that story. We'll hit enter on it,
Kerr.
and it'll load the
MJ and
page.
LeBron 2 best players I've seen link.
Now I'm hoping, USA Today often has this happen. I'm hoping it happens on this one. I'm not sure it will, but we'll see.
Virtual PC. Steve Kerr, Michael Jordan, and LeBron
Now I
James.
just did a
best
heading
players
command.
that I've ever witnessed heading level 1.
To get to the story,
Link
we'll
AJ
arrow
Marks,
down past
USA
the author and all of that.
NBA blank, graphic NBA blank, graphic NBA. Finals Golden State Warriors at Cleveland Cavaliers clickable.
Now that's a graphic that they labeled.
Blank photo Ken Blaze USA Today Sports. Blank connect.
Now you can read.
Connect. Link tweet link LinkedIn. Comment Tamil more. Cleveland and Golden State Warriors head coach Steve Kerr's opinion to the Michael Jordan LeBron James debate. Kerr, who knows the greatness of these two players better than most, having played alongside one and coached against the other, was candid in his praise of James following the Link Warriors NBA Finals sweep.
Now you heard that. See how smoothly that reads when it's done properly? Now let me show you just a couple of other things here before we run out of
12:03
time.
PM.
Let me show you the links list. I wish you could see this.
Links list dialog. Links list view. LinkedIn. 25 of 163.
There are 163 links on that page. Now, I can just arrow down through the links.
Warriors NBA Finals sweep. LeBron James addresses free agency after Finals sweep. Warriors remain kings of
See how good
NBA
they've done
after
with their
sweeping
links?
Cavaliers. LeBron injured hand punching whiteboard following game 1 loss.
I would know exactly where I'm going by these links.
At tweet HANK.
Now that one's a little interesting. It's a tweet from somebody. Those, they've got to figure out a better way to deal with those.
Twitter. Google Plus. LinkedIn. Full screen. Full screen. June
Now,
8th,
again,
Warriors.
full screen, full screen. I don't know where those links are going. They'll probably give me a full screen view of whatever was tweeted. But that's a good way to browse the page.
Escape.
I can browse by graphics on this page. They're pretty good.
USA Today visited link.
There's their
graphic.
logo.
Simgit/80 USA Today visited link graphic. Simgit/17. June 8th. The Warriors celebrate after finishing off graphic clickable.
I see, that's good. The Warriors celebrate after finishing off. So you know what that's a picture of. One thing I want to point out about the graphics, you don't have to say graphic or picture, because I don't know if you could tell, but the screen reader always says graphic. It lets me know. Listen real carefully for that on this next one.
June 8th. The Warriors celebrate after finishing off one of 93 link graphic.
Link graphic.
June 8th. Steph Curry celebrates. Link graphic. Escape.
And so it's easy to do that. Now, you can also find form fields. I don't know if USA Today has any forms on it.
There are no form fields on this page.
Nope, they're not. But you got an idea of how somebody uses a screen reader to browse a page. So I want to take the rest of our time. We've got about 8 to 10 minutes, and I want to take time for you guys to ask questions, or if you want to see how a certain page works, let me know, and we'll be glad to check out any page that you have that you'd like us to check out.
Something on like the third-party content.
Mm-hmm.
Will that sit like any iframe that's on the page?
Yeah, it's always best if you title the iframe, and then it'll read the title of it. There are ways that screen reader users can skip all of that. You can set up something called flexible web, at least in JAWS. You can't do this in NVDA or Narrator, but you can set up flexible web. If I wanted to, and I wanted you guys to see that this morning, obviously, but I could set up that page to ignore all third-party page frames. And makes for a whole lot faster and smoother reading experience. That's a good question.
Do ad blockers now, or not ad blockers, but news sites have gotten real sensitive about ad blockers recently? Has that
Yep.
started inhibiting you in the same way? Like, it's like, I see you have an ad blocker on. You're like, well, actually, I've just disabled the
Yep.
iframes. And does it catch you in the same way that
They
it
can't
catches
see
other
that.
people?
They can't see it because it doesn't actually put anything on your computer. It's just a command that JAWS issues that tells JAWS to skip that part of the page. So they don't have any idea that I'm skipping their ads. Which is really good, because my fear is if they did, they would try to disable flexible web.
Yep.
But you can see, guys, from what you just saw with me, how inconvenient that can be at the top of the page. I mean, number one, it has unlabeled graphics, so I can't get anything out of the thing anyway. So why would I want to read it?
So if you're lately playing any kind of video,
Mm-hmm.
just some sort of news, whatever, lately there'll be an ad in the middle of it. And
Yep.
I'll say, well, this will start, your news story will start in whatever. Are you able to block that content or not?
No, not if it's in the video itself. I wish you could, but you can't.
I hate that.
Well, I do too. And by the way, you mentioned video. That what I was hoping. USA Today is notorious for having autoplay videos. I was hoping that LeBron's story would have an autoplay video, and you would see what kind of a problem it could be. But they didn't choose to bless us with that today.
For video content, for example, if you are writing a technical tutorial, like what is the best approach to provide alternative text or audio? Do you do a transcript like word by word, or do you do something else to provide better context in different type of media like text or audio only?
Well, it depends on how you're doing the technical tutorial. If you're putting it in HTML and it doesn't involve a video, you just it'll be accessible to the screen reader, and you'll just need alternative text on your graphics. If you're doing it in a video form where people can see things on the screen, unless you describe what you're doing in the presentation itself very clearly, you will need an audio description or a transcript to let people know what you're doing.
Now, what about pages from other countries? We're going to be going to Spain, and so we've been looking at a lot of different sites. And so many of them have 1, 2 to multiple flags on top for whatever language
Yep.
you need. Now, are other sites, foreign sites, a problem, or is everyone kind of adapting to this?
Depends on the country, actually. A lot of countries now are living with the standard of WCAG 2.0. At least A, if not A, and double A. And so I find a lot of sites, once I get it translated to my language, work very well. Obviously, there are going to be exceptions. There are going to be sites that don't work well, but by and large, they work pretty well. And most countries
Steve Kerr,
are
Michael Jordan.
Shut up.
The LeBron James 2 best.
Page just refreshed itself. I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, most pages are great because most countries deal with the WCAG guidelines in some form.
So they have, on each of those little flags, they have to have some sort of alt text saying English,
English,
Spanish, French,
yeah.
whatever.
And generally they will. Generally they say graphic English, graphic French, graphic Spanish, whatever. They have those alt tags. And you won't, obviously you won't see the alt tags yourself, but most of them do have that. You guys have some good questions. Any more before we close down?
Are the screen readers only available in English or other
Nope.
languages?
They are available in multiple languages. I think, I can't remember, JAWS has 20 languages and NVDA, oh my, I want to say they have 62 languages currently, ranging from English, Spanish, French, Russian, Korean, Arabic, Chinese. They have quite a few. Polish, German.
Firefox,
Can
Steve
you
Kerr,
adjust a screen
Michael
reader
Jordan.
to pronounce words
Yes.
correctly?
Yes. Screen readers just pronounce based on general English rules of grammar, so sometimes they don't, and so you can go into the dictionary of the screen reader and change the pronunciation of a word to make it correct.
All right, can you change all of the phones up there that call me and mispronounce my name?
That would be a good challenge. You want to be careful with that, though. I used to be a trainer for blind people on screen readers, and I taught a couple of guys how to do that dictionary change. One day I walk into my office, get on my computer, and I get this email, and it says, "Dear Mr. Large and Round."
Steve
And what in the world? And I went back and reviewed my word, and it said Keith, and they'd gone in and changed it where every time it saw Keith, it said Mr. Large and Round. Of course, I'm not a practical joker at all. You know, I mean, you can tell I never have fun, but so you always want to be careful with that.
Oh, that's funny.
Other questions? We got time for about 2 more.
Is there, speaking of pronunciation, is there a way, let's say you have an unusual word, like a proper noun or something like that, is there a way that when a screen reader encounters that word, it will just, you can provide an alternative pronunciation when it hits it?
No, it's going to pronounce it whatever it looks like. Okay, classic example. You might see the smart glasses I'm wearing. This is a system called IRA, where if I can get the MiFi to work properly, I can connect to a visual agent all over that as a paid service, and they'll tell me what I'm seeing through these glasses. It's called IRA, A-I-R-A. Well, the screen reader, when it first saw it, was, how would you pronounce A-I-R-A? ERA, right?
Yeah.
And it just automatically says it how it looks. So you have to find that name and then go into the dictionary and then change the pronunciation.
How does the screen reader handle foreign words that pop into English text?
Really interesting. If it's coded properly, if they've coded it as a span with the language tag of what the language really is, JAWS will pronounce it in that language. If your synthesizer has that capability, which mine does. Otherwise, it'll pronounce it with an English accent. So like buenos dias for Spanish, for good morning, if you don't code that, it'll read it, buenos dias. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. So that's why we always tell people, you know, not only indicate the language of every page, but if you got a word that's from a different language, indicate that. Make it a span and indicate what language it's in so that screen readers will try to pronounce them correctly.
I was thinking Russian last names.
Oh, that would be fun in English. Well, guys, thank you for coming today. I work at Site Improve. You can always feel free to contact me if you have further questions. We'd love to help you out. You've been a good group, so go enjoy your lunch. You've earned it.
Ready. Slide 32.